The lighthouse keeper's secret. The storm had been raging for 3 days when Emma first saw the light that shouldn't have been there. Standing at her kitchen window in the small coastal town of Beacon's End, she watched the familiar beam of Crescent Point Lighthouse sweep across the churning waters. But tonight there was something different. A second light, smaller and more erratic, dancing somewhere between the lighthouse and the treacherous rocks below. Emma had lived in Beacons End her entire 32 years, and she knew every story, every legend, and every tragedy that had ever touched their shores. Her grandmother had been the lighthouse keeper before the position was automated 20 years ago, and Emma had spent countless childhood summers climbing those spiral stairs, polishing the great lens and listening to tales of ships saved and souls lost to the merciless Atlantic. But she had never seen anything like this mysterious second light. The next morning, when the storm finally broke and the sun emerged pale and watery through the dissipating clouds, Emma decided to investigate. She pulled on her weathered hiking boots and thick wool coat, grabbed her camera, and set out along the coastal path toward Crescent Point. The lighthouse stood tall and proud on its rocky promontory, its white tower gleaming in the morning light. But as she drew closer, Emma noticed something that made her pause. The heavy wooden door at the base of the lighthouse, which had been padlocked and sealed for 2 decades, stood slightly ajar. Her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, Emma approached the door. The metal padlock lay on the ground, its shackle cleanly cut through with what appeared to be bolt cutters. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the circular chamber that had once been her grandmother's workspace. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that streamed through the open door, illuminating the familiar spiral staircase that wound upward into the shadows above. As Emma began to climb, her fingers trailing along the smooth stone walls, memories came flooding back. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice explaining how the lighthouse had been built in 1847 after the merchant ship Prosperity had been dashed against the rocks in a fierce winter storm, claiming 43 lives. The lighthouse had faithfully guided ships to safety for over a century before modern navigation systems made it obsolete, but it had remained a beloved landmark and a symbol of hope for the community. At the top of the lighthouse, Emma found herself in the lantern room, surrounded by the massive Fresnel lens that had once concentrated the beacon's light into a powerful beam visible for miles at sea. But what caught her attention wasn't the lens itself. It was the small camping setup in the corner. A sleeping bag, a battery-powered lantern, several bottles of water, and a journal wrapped in plastic lay carefully arranged on the floor. Someone had been living here, and recently. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was shaky but legible, and the words made her blood run cold. Day 1. They think I'm dead. Maybe that's for the best. The truth about the Prosperity would destroy too many lives. But I can't take it to my grave. Someone needs to know what really happened that night in 1847. As Emma continued reading, she discovered that the journal belonged to Dr. Harold Whitmore, the town's elderly historian who had supposedly died in a car accident 3 months earlier. But according to the journal, Harold had faked his death after uncovering a devastating secret about the founding of Beacon's End. The Prosperity hadn't been an innocent merchant vessel. It had been a slave ship carrying dozens of enslaved people from Africa to be sold in the American South. The town's founding families hadn't built the lighthouse as a beacon of hope, but as a monument to cover up their complicity in one of history's greatest crimes. Harold's research had revealed that the ship had been deliberately wrecked by the town's founders, who had been expecting its arrival and planning to profit from its human cargo. When a storm threatened to drive the ship off course, they had extinguished the lighthouse that should have guided it to safety, causing it to founder. On the rocks, The official story of the tragic accident had been carefully constructed to hide the truth, and the lighthouse had been built not to prevent future tragedies, but to serve as a permanent reminder of their guilt. Emma sank onto the dusty floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her own family had been among the town's founders, and her great-great-grandfather had been one of the men who had voted to build the lighthouse. A comfortable narrative of her family's history, of their role as protectors and guardians of the sea, crumbled around her like sand as she continued reading. Emma learned that Harold had spent years gathering evidence, interviewing descendants of survivors, and piecing together the true story of that terrible night. He had been preparing to publish his findings when he realized that the truth would destroy not just his own family's reputation, but the livelihoods of everyone in Beacon's End. The town's economy depended on tourism, and tourists came to see the picturesque lighthouse and hear the romantic stories of ships saved and heroes made. The truth would turn their symbol of hope into a monument to shame, but Harold couldn't live with the lie any longer. The journal revealed his internal struggle, his sleepless nights, and his growing conviction that the victims of the Prosperity deserved to have their story told. He had decided to fake his death and retreat to the lighthouse, where he would spend his remaining years documenting the truth and deciding how to reveal it to the world. Emma closed the journal and looked out through the lighthouse's windows at the town below. Beacon's End looked peaceful and prosperous in the afternoon sun, its harbor filled with fishing boats and pleasure craft, its streets lined with quaint shops and restaurants that catered to the steady stream of visitors. The lighthouse was featured on every postcard, every tourist brochure, and every piece of marketing material the town produced. It was their brand, their identity, their economic lifeline. As the sun began to set, Emma saw the automatic beacon begin its nightly rotation, sending its beam across the darkening waters just as it had done for 20 years since automation. But now she understood the irony of that light. It was a beacon built on blood, a symbol of salvation that had been conceived in sin. She heard footsteps on the spiral staircase below, and moments later, Dr. Harold Whitmore himself emerged into the lantern room. He was thinner than she remembered, his hair completely white now, his face deeply lined with worry and exhaustion. But his eyes were clear and determined. "Emma," he said simply, as if he had been expecting her. "I wondered when someone would find me." They talked until dawn, Harold sharing the full story of his research and his moral dilemma, Emma struggling to process the implications of what she had learned. As the first light of morning crept across the horizon, they reached a decision. Together, the truth needed to be told, but it needed to be told in a way that honored both the victims of the Prosperity and the innocent people of Beacon's End who had built their lives around a lie. Over the following weeks, Emma worked with Harold to craft a plan. They would reveal the truth gradually, starting with the Historical Society and the Town Council, giving the community time to process and adapt. They would propose a new narrative for the lighthouse, not as a cover-up for past crimes, but as a genuine beacon of hope for the future. The lighthouse would become a memorial to the victims of the Prosperity, a place where their stories would be told and their memories honored. The town's reaction was everything they had feared and hoped for. There was anger, denial, and despair, but also a growing sense of determination to make things right. The lighthouse was rededicated as a memorial to the victims of the Prosperity, with their names etched in stone at its base. The town's tourism industry evolved to embrace the complete story of its history, attracting visitors who came not just for the romantic lighthouse tale, but for the more complex and ultimately more meaningful story of redemption and truth. Dr. Harold Whitmore emerged from his self-imposed exile to become the lighthouse's first official historian, and Emma left her job to work alongside him. Together, they ensured that the lighthouse would continue to serve as a beacon, not just for ships at sea, but for the moral courage to confront difficult truths and the hope that even the darkest chapters of history can be transformed into lessons for a better future. The mysterious second light that Emma had seen during the storm was never explained, but she liked to think it had been a sign that the truth was ready to emerge from the shadows. The lighthouse still stands today, its beams sweeping across the waters each night, but now it carries with it the weight of authentic history and the promise of honest remembrance. Sometimes the most powerful lighthouses are those that illuminate not just the rocks we must avoid, but the truths we must finally face.